I was 22, fresh out of school, and needed a job, any job. So I took a security guard position at an industrial park on the absolute fringe of the city. My shift was a lonely stretch, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and my workspace was a small, windowed trailer, or what we called the guard shack. The industrial park itself was nothing special: a fenced-in yard, a big warehouse, and a few shipping containers filled with construction supplies. But what made it memorable was what lay immediately behind the chain-link fence on the north side, the Black Forest. It was vast, dense, and even in the daytime, it felt oppressive. People said locals only went in there if they wanted to disappear. I considered myself a practical guy. I believed in logic, not local legends. For the first month, the job was just 8 hours of boredom, punctuated by bad internet and lukewarm coffee. Until the silence began. It wasn't normal nighttime quiet. It was a straining, heavy silence, the kind that hurts your ears. All the natural sounds that should have been there, the rustling of leaves, the hooting of owls, the nocturnal rustling of small animals, simply vanished. It was a complete acoustic void. I was sitting in the shack around 2 a.m. trying to watch a movie on my laptop when this silence washed over the area. I tried to convince myself it was just some atmospheric anomaly, but the vacuum was too profound. And then, into that perfect silence, came a sound. It wasn't a snap or a crack. It sounded like something very heavy being dragged across rough gravel and undergrowth, slow and rhythmic, coming from deep within the forest. My rational mind immediately jumped to animal? Poacher? I switched off the lights in the shack and pressed my face against the dusty window. All I could see was the inky black silhouette of the tree line against a sliver of moonlight. The dragging sound stopped the moment I focused on it. I grabbed my flashlight, a sturdy, heavy-duty mag light, and stepped out. The air felt colder, heavier. I pointed the beam toward the woods, tracing the fence line. Nothing, just twisted trees that looked like reaching claws. The moment I started walking back to the shack, the dragging sound resumed, now closer. I retreated to the safety of the shack, my heart pounding a new rhythm against my ribs. In the morning, when my colleague arrived, I asked him about strange animals. He just grinned uncomfortably and said, "Don't worry about the animals, Tom. Worry about the things that walk on 2 legs." The strange occurrences became routine. The dragging, the low, guttural thumping, and sometimes a quiet, almost imperceptible whispering, not like one voice, but like a dozen, muffled by distance and leaves. I started doing my security rounds much faster, always feeling a profound sense of being observed. Then, about a week after the first incident, I saw it. It was 3 a.m., total darkness save for a weak sliver of moon. I was checking the back perimeter of the warehouse, which was the furthest point from my safe haven. As I turned to walk back, I froze. By the chain-link fence, less than 20 feet away, where the dark undergrowth met the metal, stood a silhouette. It was tall. That was the first terrifying thought. Not just tall like a man, but unnaturally elongated and slender. I couldn't bring myself to shine the beam of the maglite directly onto it. I just stared at the silhouette, which was an unnatural shade of blacker than black against the shadows around it. It was completely motionless. And then I noticed the movement. The entire figure remained still, but its head, or whatever passed for one, tilted slowly to the side like a curious bird. Only it was analyzing me with a chilling, cold interest. My body refused to move. The adrenaline had locked me in place. And then, from that spot near the fence, I heard something that truly shattered my composure. It wasn't the whispering. It was a loud, deep, cracking sigh, almost human-sounding but with a strange, rough resonance, as if the sound was created by a throat that hadn't been used to speak in a very long time. It was as if the thing was acknowledging my presence, simply saying, There you are. I ran. I sprinted back to the guard shack, slammed the door, locked it, and pulled the window blinds down. I was shaking so violently I couldn't hold my flashlight steady. I didn't bother calling the police. I knew what they'd say. I spent the rest of the shift until 6 a.m. huddled by the door, hand on the handle, trying to breathe quietly. The dragging and the silence were gone. They were replaced by a slow, repetitive, quiet tapping on the fence right outside my window. A gentle tap, 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 like the tip of a single fingernail. The moment my relief arrived, I bolted. I didn't say goodbye, I just collected my things and drove away. I quit that very morning. I still don't know what I saw. A very tall person? An animal on its hind legs? Or something else entirely? But here's the most disturbing part. Months later, checking local news online, I stumbled upon a small report. In the Black Forest, near the industrial zone, a discarded tent and personal effects belonging to a missing hiker from over a year ago were found. The body was never located. I know whatever is in that forest is active, and it waits. I've had my share of truly terrible jobs, but nothing compared to the 4 months I spent as a closing manager at a chain toy store. Let's call it Toys Plus. The store was massive, 2 full floors of brightly colored plastic and licensed merchandise. But by 11 p.m., when the last customer left and the cleaning crew finished, the atmosphere transformed. It became a cavernous, dark tomb filled with thousands of plastic eyes staring out of the darkness. My main job was simple: lock up the cash registers, finish the daily paperwork, and ensure the entire building was secure before setting the alarm and leaving around 1 a.m. The building itself was old, built in the late 70s, and it came with all the quirks of aging commercial architecture. Constant draft, random creaks, and an elevator that sounded like it was crying when it moved. But there was one section that always gave me the chills: the doll and action figure aisle on the 2nd floor. It was right next to the emergency exit stairs, a place rarely used, and the low lighting there seemed to just swallow sound. The first few weeks were fine. Routine was everything. But one Tuesday night, as I was reconciling the final receipts downstairs, I heard it. A sound, clear as a bell, coming from the 2nd floor. Laughter. It was a light, high-pitched giggle. Not loud, but definitely there and definitely human. I immediately thought, a kid must have hidden after closing. It happens. Kids sometimes hide in the giant cardboard display boxes as a dare. I grabbed my flashlight and jogged upstairs, flipping on the main lights as I went. The 2nd floor was empty. The sound system was off, and no windows were open. I walked through every aisle, checking the large boxes and behind the seasonal displays. Nothing. I assumed it must have been the building settling, or maybe fatigue playing tricks on me. I went back downstairs, started my computer for the final shutdown, and dismissed it. 5 minutes later, the laughter returned. Only this time, it was much closer, and it was followed by the unmistakable sound of a single, slow clack, like a small, hard object hitting the tiled floor. Now I was truly unnerved. I went back upstairs, much slower this time. I walked to the dolls and action figures aisle where the sound seemed to have originated. I stopped and held my breath, listening for any shift in the air. That's when I saw it. On the floor, right in front of the emergency exit door, was a doll. It was one of the large, expensive porcelain collectible dolls taken out of its display case. I knew which one it was. It was positioned high up on a shelf behind a protective acrylic sheet. Now it was lying face up on the cold tile, its glass eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. It hadn't just fallen. Someone, or something, had taken it out of its locked display. My blood ran cold. I immediately called my district manager, Jim, and told him I thought we had an intruder. He told me to lock myself in the office and call the police. I did exactly that. I ran downstairs, slammed the heavy metal door of the manager's office shut, and keyed in the number for emergency services. While I was on the line with the dispatcher, whispering the address and trying to keep my voice from shaking, I started hearing a series of small, rapid taps coming from the outside of the office door. It sounded like the person, or whatever it was just on the other side. I lowered the phone and froze. The tapping stopped. Then, from the hallway outside the office, I heard a sound that didn't make any sense. The noise of a small music box winding down. It was one of the toys from the baby section, a little elephant that played a gentle lullaby. The song was slow, sweet, and utterly terrifying in the dead silence of the sealed store. The lullaby faded out. Silence. Then the tapping started again, but this time it wasn't just on the door. It was on the observation window set high up in the door. I knew I couldn't look. I couldn't confirm that there was a face pressing against the glass. I huddled under the desk, trying to keep the dispatcher updated through choked whispers. I waited maybe 10 minutes, which felt like an eternity, until I heard the distant sirens and the heavy metallic clang of the police kicking open the main emergency entrance. They searched the entire building, every aisle, every box, every bathroom stall. They found nothing. All doors and windows were still locked and intact. The only thing they found was the porcelain doll on the second floor and the music box lying on the hallway floor right outside my office, an item that was usually kept locked in a storage closet. The police determined that the building was secure and that I was likely suffering from stress and fatigue. I knew better. I quit the next day. But before I left, I went back upstairs to retrieve my personal lockbox. As I was walking through the empty aisles for the last time, I glanced at the display where the porcelain doll usually sat. I stopped dead. The protective acrylic sheet for the doll was back in place, but someone, or something, had replaced the doll on the stand. It wasn't the original doll. It was a cheap plastic action figure of a small, smiling man. And someone had positioned it so it was facing outwards, its plastic head slightly tilted, looking directly down the aisle toward the office where I had hidden. I didn't touch it. I just walked out and never looked back. To this day, I can still hear that high-pitched giggle and the tune of that music box whenever I'm left alone in the dark. The scariest things that ever happen often occur when you're tired, isolated, and far from help. And that perfectly describes the drive I had to make every other month for work. I used to be a regional sales rep, and my territory meant driving between two major cities, a 6-hour route that mostly involved empty, winding back roads through a heavily forested state park. I usually drove it at night to beat the traffic, meaning I was alone on the highway between midnight and 3 a.m. It was one of those foggy, moonless nights in late October, the kind of night where your headlights just seem to illuminate a shallow, gray bowl in front of your car, and everything else is just thick darkness. I was about halfway through the route, running on stale coffee and pure stubbornness, when I saw him. He was standing right next to the white line on the shoulder, facing away from me, his thumb stuck out vaguely towards the road. He was tall, dressed in dark, heavy clothing, and he carried a bulky, old-fashioned rucksack. The unusual thing was his location. This wasn't near any town or gas station. It was a completely desolate stretch of highway surrounded by woods on both sides. I'm generally cautious about picking up strangers, but the guy looked genuinely distressed. Maybe his car broke down. I pulled over about 50 feet past him, waited until he was close, and popped the trunk release. He didn't walk towards the trunk. He walked straight to the passenger door and pulled it open without waiting. He slid into the seat, dropping his huge rucksack onto the floor, which landed with a muffled clank, like something hard and metallic hitting the carpet. "Thanks," he said, his voice deep and gravelly. His tone wasn't grateful, though. It was just flat. I glanced over. He had a strong, unsettling presence. His eyes were dark and intense. He never looked at me. He just stared straight ahead through the windshield, even though the fog made seeing more than 20 feet impossible. "Where are you heading?" I asked, pulling back onto the road. "Just north," he said. "North is a long way," I chuckled nervously. "I'm going to the town of Willow Creek. That's about 2 hours from here." "That'll do," he replied. And that was it. The conversation ended. The silence that followed was heavy and unnerving. I tried to make small talk, asked about his rucksack, asked what he was doing out here, asked if he was a hiker. Every answer was a one-word grunt or a short, uninformative phrase. I started to feel a deep, chilling regret. About 40 minutes into the drive, I started to notice his movements. He wasn't sitting still. He was subtly moving his right hand, reaching down, unzipping his rucksack, and reaching inside. I shot a quick glance at him. He was definitely fumbling with something heavy and dense inside that bag. My mind instantly spiraled into horror movie cliches. Is he pulling out a weapon? A knife? I started calculating the distance to the next potential landmark, a closed gas station maybe 15 minutes away. I sped up and gripped the wheel tighter. Then he stopped fumbling. He slowly, deliberately pulled his hand out of the bag. And he wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding a small, very old, and very rusty metal box. It looked like something you'd find buried in the dirt. He placed the box on his lap and slowly, inch by inch, started to slide the lid open. He was completely focused on the box. His face was unreadable. I was terrified, but also morbidly curious. What could be so important inside that rusty box? As the lid finally started to separate from the base, I caught a tiny movement in the corner of my eye. He wasn't looking at the box anymore. He had turned his head slowly, and now his intense, dark eyes were fixed entirely on me, holding my gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment. And then he did something that still makes my stomach turn. He smiled. It wasn't a friendly or reassuring smile. It was a wide, unnatural grin that looked completely foreign on his face, like a mask pulled too tight. His eyes, fixed on mine, didn't move. In a voice that was suddenly clear and eerily cheerful, he said, "Do you want to see what's in the box, friend? It's something I found. Something important." The casual tone, the sudden friendliness, and that smile, it was all wrong. I didn't want to know what was in the box. I didn't want to be friends. I jammed my foot down on the accelerator and changed the subject instantly. "Listen, I need to stop here for gas," I lied, even though the tank was full. I pulled the car violently onto the gravel parking lot of a closed-down truck stop. Before the car had fully stopped, I unlocked the doors. "This is as far as I go tonight. I have to call in an urgent issue. I wish you the best of luck." He didn't move. He didn't blink. He just kept that wide, unsettling smile on his face, holding the rusty box loosely in his hands. "Are you sure?" he asked. The cheerfulness was still there, but now there was a thin, cold edge of warning underneath it. "I was enjoying the ride." "Yes," I insisted, forcing the words out. "I have to stop now. You need to get out." He stared at me for maybe 3 more seconds, then his expression snapped back to the blank, heavy presence he had been before. Without another word, he opened the door, retrieved his heavy rucksack with that metallic clank, and closed the door. I sat there, frozen, watching him walk away. He didn't walk towards the road to catch the next car. He walked straight across the abandoned parking lot and disappeared into the thick fog and the woods behind the truck stop. The moment he was gone, I slammed the lock buttons and tore out of that parking lot, driving faster than I've ever driven in my life. I didn't slow down until I hit the city limits. I never picked up a hitchhiker again. And I still don't know what was in that box, or what kind of person or thing gets dropped off in the middle of nowhere only to walk straight into the deep woods. But every time I drive that route, I remember that smile. And I remember how close I was to seeing the contents of that box. And I'm infinitely grateful I never did.